Picture this. A knock on my door late at night. My landlord's there, but he's not alone. Two strangers step in, the lock clicks, and suddenly my tiny apartment's a trap. My heart's pounding. I'm backed against the wall, and just when I think it's over, bam! The door flies open. Who's my savior? A guy I barely know. And that's just the start. Stick around because the twist at the end? It'll hit you like a freight train. Hey, before we jump into this tale, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and hit that subscribe button. Ready? Let's roll. I was sprawled out on my beat-up couch in my tiny apartment on the edge of Austin, Texas, when it all started. My legs ached from a double shift at the diner, and my sneakers were still on because I was too wiped to kick them off. The clock on the wall said 9:47 p.m., and I was just starting to zone out when I heard it. A knock. At first, it was soft, almost polite, like someone wasn't sure they had the right place. I ignored it, figuring it was the wind or maybe a neighbor dropping something. But then it came again, louder, sharper, like it meant business. My stomach did a little flip. I knew who it was. Jack, my landlord. I'd been dodging his texts about the rent for weeks, and I guess he'd had enough. I'm Lizzie, 25, and life hasn't exactly been handing me wins lately. I work two jobs, waiting tables at a greasy spoon called Marty's Diner and stocking shelves at a corner store a few blocks away. It's barely enough to cover the basics: ramen noodles, gas for my clunker of a car, and the electric bill so I don't sit in the dark. Rent, though? That's been a problem. I'm 3 months behind, $700 in the hole, and every time I think I'll catch up, something else breaks. Last week it was the car battery. This place isn't much. A cramped one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a fridge that sounds like a dying lawnmower. But it's mine. Or it was, until that night. I pushed myself off the couch, my hands sweaty as I wiped them on my jeans. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the thin door. All right, I muttered under my breath, trying to sound tougher than I felt. My heart was pounding, thumping against my ribs like it wanted out. I'd been late before, and Jack had always been cool about it. Too cool, maybe. He'd text me stuff like, "No rush, Lizzie, we'll sort it out," with a winking emoji that made my skin itch. I should have known better than to trust that vibe, but I was desperate, and desperate people don't ask questions. I took a shaky breath and flipped the lock. The door creaked open, and there he was. Jack, 38, with his usual too-wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He's the kind of guy you'd pass in a grocery store and not think twice about. Average height, brown hair thinning a little, always in a faded polo shirt. But that night, something felt off. Maybe it was the way he leaned against the doorframe. Too casual, like he owned more than just the building. Or maybe it was the two guys standing behind him. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't familiar. Strangers, both older, maybe mid-40s. One was built like a linebacker, broad shoulders and a neck tattoo peeking out of his jacket. The other was taller, leaner, with sharp eyes that flicked over me like he was sizing up a used car. I froze, my fingers still on the doorknob, every nerve screaming at me to slam it shut. But I didn't. I couldn't. Jack stepped forward, brushing past me into the apartment like it was his living room. "Hey, Lizzie," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "Time we had a little chat, huh?" The two guys followed him in, slow and deliberate, like they'd done this before. The linebacker crossed his arms and planted himself by the door, blocking the only way out. The tall one just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me. My mouth went dry. "Jack, I know I'm late," I stammered, hating how small my voice sounded. "I just need a little more time, I swear." He turned, that smile stretching wider, and tilted his head like I'd said something cute. "Oh, I know you're good for it," he said, "but we've got to figure something out tonight." I took a step back, my sneakers scuffing the worn carpet. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I dealt with late rent before, angry notes, extra fees. But this? This was different. Jack wasn't here to negotiate a payment plan. Those guys weren't here for moral support. My mind raced, replaying every weird moment with him. The way he'd linger after fixing a leaky faucet. The way he'd ask about my day with that creepy warmth. I'd brushed it off as him being friendly, but now I saw it for what it was. A trap I'd walked right into. Look, I said, forcing my voice to steady. I'll get the money. I just need. He cut me off with a chuckle, shaking his head like I was missing the point. Money's not the only thing we can talk about, he said, taking a step closer. My stomach twisted. I glanced at the linebacker. He shifted his weight, his jacket rustling. The tall one's eyes narrowed, like he was waiting for me to bolt. I wanted to. Every instinct I had was yelling at me to run, scream, do something. But my legs wouldn't move. I was stuck, pinned in my own home by 3 pairs of eyes that didn't care what I wanted. I think about that moment a lot now. How I stood there, letting them waltz in. Part of me wants to say I should have fought back right then, slammed the door, called someone. But who? My parents are 1,000 miles away in Ohio, and we barely talk. My friends? Most of them drifted off after I got too busy or too broke to hang out. I'd been on my own for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a lifeline. Maybe that's why I didn't move. Maybe that's why I let Jack keep talking. So, he said, leaning against my rickety kitchen counter. What do you say, Lizzie? We can help each other out here. His tone was light, like we were buddies hashing out a favor. But his eyes, they were cold, locked on me like I was a puzzle he'd already solved. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Help each other how? I asked, even though I didn't want the answer. He just grinned, and the linebacker cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. That's when I knew I was in deep. This wasn't about rent anymore. It was about me, and what they thought I owed them. I'd always told myself I was smart, that I could handle whatever life threw at me. But standing there, with Jack's smile burning into me and 2 strangers blocking my escape, I didn't feel smart. I felt small. And I hated it. Here's the thing. I want you to think about this with me. Have you ever trusted someone because you had to? Because you didn't see another way? I did with Jack. I let his nice guy act fool me, and it almost cost me everything. Looking back, I wonder what I could have done differently. Maybe saved more, worked harder, asked for help. But in that moment, all I could do was stand there, waiting for whatever came next. Stick with me, because you won't believe how this turns out. Jack was pacing my cramped living room like he owned it, his boots scuffing the faded carpet. The peeling wallpaper and the hum of my ancient AC unit felt louder in the silence between his words. He brushed a hand over my coffee mug on the counter, then picked up a stack of unpaid bills like he was checking my life's scorecard. I've been patient, Lizzie. You know that, he said, his voice smooth but heavy, like honey laced with something sour. It hit me hard. There was no kindness in it anymore. The linebacker guy stood by the door, arms crossed, his neck tattoo flexing every time he shifted. The tall one leaned against the wall, his cold eyes locked on me, sizing me up like I was something he could take apart. I backed up a step, my heart hammering. Jack, I'll get the money. I just need. He cut me off with a laugh, sharp and quick. Money's not the only way to settle this, he said, stepping closer. My back hit the wall, the rough texture scratching through my shirt. I glanced at the door, locked. The tall guy had flipped the deadbolt when I wasn't looking, and the sound echoed in my head like a gunshot. My chest tightened. This wasn't about rent. This was about me, trapped in my own space with 3 guys who didn't care what I wanted. Jack, please, I said, my voice shaky but louder than before. I just need a week. He tilted his head, that creepy smile stretching wider. A week's not gonna cut it anymore, he said, his tone dipping low. But there's other ways we can work this out. He reached for my shoulder, and I jerked back, my sneakers squeaking on the floor. The linebacker shifted, cracking his knuckles again. Loud, deliberate. The tall one didn't move, just watched, like he was waiting for the show to start. My stomach churned. I could feel the walls closing in, the air getting thick and hard to breathe. I should have seen this coming. All those times Jack let the rent slide, texting me, "We'll figure it out," with that stupid winking emoji. I thought he was being nice. But nice doesn't come free, does it? I'd been so busy surviving, slinging burgers at Marty's, stocking shelves till midnight, that I didn't catch the hints. The way he'd hang around too long after fixing a light bulb, asking about my day like we were pals. I'd ignored it, told myself I was overthinking. Now, standing there with my back against the wall, I knew I'd been dead wrong. "What do you mean, work this out?" I asked, forcing the words out. Jack chuckled, glancing at his buddies. "You're a smart girl, Lizzie. You get it." His hand hovered near my arm again, and I swatted it away, my pulse racing. "Don't touch me," I snapped, louder than I meant to. His smile faltered for a second, then came back, sharper. "Relax," he said, like I was the one being unreasonable. "We're just talking here." Talking. Sure. The locked door said otherwise. The linebacker's stance said otherwise. The tall guy's stare said otherwise. My mind was spinning, grasping for a way out. I could scream, but who'd hear me? These walls were paper thin, but my neighbors were either out or too used to noise to care. I could try to run, but the linebacker was a wall of muscle between me and freedom. My phone was on the couch, too far to grab. I was stuck, and they knew it. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Look, I don't know what you think this is, but I'm not—" I didn't finish. Jack stepped closer, cutting me off without words, his breath hot on my face. "You owe me, Lizzie," he said, low and firm. "I've been good to you. Time to return the favor." Favor? I wanted to laugh, scream, anything, but my throat locked up. The linebacker moved just a step, and the room felt smaller, tighter, like a cage snapping shut. That's when I started thinking about trust. How I'd let myself believe Jack was different because he didn't hound me like other landlords. How I'd ignored that gut feeling every time he smiled too long. I'd trusted him because I had to, because being late on rent left me with no options. And now here I was, cornered in my own home, wondering how I'd been so blind. It's funny, right? You think you're smart until you're not. I opened my mouth to say something. Anything when it happened. A deafening bang shook the room. The front door flew open, slamming against the wall so hard I felt the floor vibrate. Wood splintered, and for a split second, everything stopped. Jack froze mid-step, his hand still in the air. The linebacker flinched, his arms dropping. The tall guy's head snapped toward the doorway. My heart leapt into my throat, and I whipped around to see what, or who, had just saved me from whatever was about to go down. It was chaos, loud and fast, like a scene from a movie I didn't sign up for. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. But one thing hit me clear as day. That door crashing open was my lifeline. I didn't know who was on the other side yet, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. And that changed everything. Here's where I want you to pause with me. Have you ever misjudged someone because they seemed safe? I did with Jack, and it nearly trapped me. Looking back, I see the signs. Those little red flags I waved off because I was too tired, too broke, too stuck. Maybe you've been there too, trusting the wrong person because you didn't have a choice. What would you have done in my shoes? Yell? Fight? Or freeze like I did? I don't have the answer yet, but I'm still here to figure it out. And I'm taking you along for the ride. The door crashed open, and there was Mike, my upstairs neighbor, standing in the frame like some kind of action hero who didn't know he'd signed up for the role. His face was flushed, eyes wide and furious, his chest heaving like he'd just sprinted down the stairs. "What the hell's going on here?" he barked, his voice rough and loud enough to bounce off the walls. Jack spun around, his creepy smile gone, replaced by a snarl. The linebacker guy flinched, his big arms dropping like he wasn't sure what to do. The tall one's head snapped toward Mike, his cold stare shifting fast. I sucked in a breath, my knees wobbling as I pressed myself against the wall. Jack cursed under his breath, something sharp and nasty. And for the first time, I saw him rattled. "This ain't your business," he snapped. But Mike didn't budge. "Sounds like it is," Mike shot back, stepping inside, his sneakers squeaking on the carpet. The linebacker moved quick, shoving past Mike with his shoulder, nearly knocking him into the doorframe. He bolted down the hall, his heavy steps fading fast. Jack glared at me, his jaw tight, and muttered, "We're not done," before shoving past Mike too. disappearing after his buddy. The tall one lingered, though. He turned to me, his sharp eyes locking on mine, and a slow, weird smirk curled his lips, like he wasn't fazed at all. Then he strolled out, hands in his pockets like he was leaving a boring party. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out, hitting the carpet hard. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts. Mike crouched in front of me, his brows furrowed. "Hey, Lizzie, you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, careful. I flinched when he reached out, and he pulled his hand back fast, palms up. "Whoa, it's just me. You're good now." Good? I didn't feel good. I felt like I'd just dodged something I couldn't even name. I nodded anyway, my throat too tight to talk. The room was dead quiet now, just the hum of the AC and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mike stayed close, his eyes darting to the busted door hanging off its hinges. "I heard them through the floor," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Couldn't tell what they were saying, but you sounded freaked. Had to check." I swallowed hard, staring at the splintered wood. If he hadn't come, if he'd ignored it. My stomach twisted just thinking about it. Mike's 30, a quiet guy I'd only ever swapped hellos with in the elevator. Works construction, I think. Always in dusty boots and a faded Astros cap. Never figured him for the type to bust in like that. But there he was, my accidental lifeline. "I'm calling the cops," he said, pulling out his phone. I didn't argue. What was I gonna say? Jack and his crew were gone, and I had nothing but a racing pulse and a bad feeling to show for it. The cops showed up about 20 minutes later, two of them in crisp uniforms, notebooks out. I sat on the couch, a scratchy blanket around my shoulders that Mike had grabbed from my closet. "What happened?" one asked, pen ready. I told them. Jack showing up with those guys, the locked door, the way they wouldn't leave. "Did they hurt you?" the other cop asked, eyeing me. I shook my head. "No, not really. They didn't push me, didn't grab me, but the weight of their words, the way they boxed me in, that felt real enough." The cops scribbled notes, said they'd look into it, and left. I knew what that meant. No proof, no case. Jack was in the wind. Mike stayed after they left, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again, his voice low. I nodded, but it was a lie. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and every creak in the building made me jump. "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. "Yeah, I did. Couldn't just sit there." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the worry in his eyes. It hit me. He'd been scared too, but he still showed up. I keep replaying that night, wondering what if? What if Mike hadn't heard me? What if he'd stayed upstairs, minding his own business? I don't know what Jack wanted to happen, but I know it wasn't good. And I didn't fight. Not really. I froze. Let them corner me. That's the part that stings. I always thought I'd be tougher, you know? Like in those movies where the girl grabs a lamp and swings. But I just stood there, waiting for someone else to save me. Maybe that's a lesson. Sometimes you don't know what you're made of until it's crunch time. Mike broke the silence. "You can't stay here alone tonight," he said, firm but not pushy. "Crash at my place if you want. Couch is yours." I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't want to be here, not with the door busted and Jack's words, "We're not done," ringing in my head. As we grabbed my stuff, I thought about how quick things can flip. One minute you're stressing about rent, the next you're staring down something way worse. And the crazy part? Help came from a guy I barely knew. Makes you wonder who's got your back when you least expect it. So here's my question for you. Ever had someone step in when you couldn't step up? I didn't see Mike coming, but he changed everything. Maybe we're not as alone as we think. Stick around, because this isn't over yet. It's been a week since that night, and I'm still jumping at every noise in my little Austin apartment. The busted door's fixed now. Mike helped me rig it with a new lock. But I check it 5 times before bed, sometimes more. The place feels different, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something else to go wrong. I barely sleep. Every creak, every car horn outside sends my heart racing. I keep hearing Jack's voice in my head. "We're not done." and it's like a ghost that won't leave. I'm still behind on rent. That $700 hole staring at me from the stack of bills on the counter. But now it's more than money. It's the fear that sticks, curling up inside me like a stray cat I can't shoo away. Mike's been a rock, though. He's popped by a few times, bringing coffee from the gas station down the street, checking if I'm okay. You don't have to keep doing this, I told him yesterday, stirring sugar into my cup. He just shrugged, his Astros cap tipped back. I'd feel like a jerk if I didn't, he said, grinning a little. Besides, you make terrible coffee. I laughed, first time since that night, and it felt good, like a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. He's 30, solid, the kind of guy who doesn't say much but shows up when it counts. I didn't expect that from a guy I barely knew. The cops didn't do much. They came, asked their questions, wrote stuff down, and bounced. Call us if he shows up again, they said, like that's supposed to fix it. Jack's gone quiet, no texts, no knocks, but I don't trust it. That tall guy's smirk keeps flashing in my mind, like he knows something I don't. I've been crashing at my friend Margie's place a couple nights this week. She's 27, works at Marty's diner with me, and when I told her what happened, her eyes got huge. Girl, you're staying with me till this blows over, she said, dragging me to her couch with a pile of blankets. It's tight, but it beats being alone. I've started talking about it more, letting it out instead of bottling it up. Margie listens, nodding as I spill how scared I was, how I froze. You did what you could, she said last night, handing me a mug of tea. Sometimes surviving's enough. She's right, I guess. I didn't fight Jack off with some badass move, but I'm still here. Mike said something similar when we grabbed tacos at a food truck yesterday. You're tougher than you think, he told me, salsa dripping down his chin. Most people would have cracked. I smirked. I did crack. He shook his head. Nah, you're still standing. That's what counts. I think about that a lot. Standing. I always figured I'd be the type to swing back. But when it hit, I just stood there, waiting for Mike to bust in. It's not the hero story I'd tell myself, but it's real. And real's messy. I've been asking myself what I'd do if it happened again. Freeze? Run? Yell? I don't know, but I'm trying to figure it out. Talking helps. Margie, Mike, even you guys listening right now. It's like each word chips away at the fear, makes it smaller. I'm not there yet, but I'm moving. So here's my question. What would you do? If you were me cornered in your own place, would you lock up like I did? Or find some fire I couldn't? I used to think I'd know the answer, but life's not that simple. Mike saved me that night, and Margie's keeping me sane now. Help doesn't always come how you expect. It's not a knight in armor, just a neighbor with good timing or a friend with a couch. Maybe that's the takeaway. You're never as alone as you feel. I was folding laundry at Margie's this morning, replaying it all, when my phone buzzed. A text. My hands froze, the shirt slipping to the floor. Unknown number. Miss me, Lizzie, it read, with that damn winking emoji. My stomach dropped. Jack, he's back. I stared at the screen, breath stuck in my throat, when the door rattled. Someone knocking, hard. I spun around, heart slamming, expecting his face through the peephole. But it was Mike, holding a bag of donuts, grinning like nothing was wrong. Thought you'd need a sugar fix, he said, stepping in. I forced a smile, shoving the phone in my pocket. He didn't see it. I didn't tell him. Not yet. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text. Look outside. I froze, blood roaring in my ears. Mike was joking about glaze versus sprinkles, oblivious as I edged to the window. I pulled the curtain back, just an inch, and there, across the street, under a flickering streetlight, stood the tall guy, smirking, watching. He raised a hand, waved once, and walked off into the dark. I dropped the curtain, my knees buckling, and the phone slipped from my hand, screen still glowing with Jack's words. If you loved this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, drop a comment, and pass it along to your buddies. This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.